Thank you very much indeed, Connor, for the fascinating insight to your farm. Indeed, you've kind of did my job. Next up is Keith Gu, a dairy farmer from West Sussex in England who manages his family farm of 2,300 acres and 700 pedigree Holstein cows over 2 sites on a fully robotic milking system. Keith will be talking about how he approaches his breeding strategy. So over to you, Keith.
Right, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Wow, there was a lot of people here. My name is Keith Gu. I manage the dairies at Huddlestone Farms, and thanks to AgResearch for inviting me over to speak. I do what I do at home for 2 reasons mainly. People and cows, and today I'm going to talk about cows predominantly. So this cow behind me is a pretty special cow for us. We'll talk about her descendants a little bit later. But I'll start off talking a bit of an introduction about myself, the farm at home, and then I'll talk onto the nuts and bolts of our genetics and what we do. So like a lot of you here probably, I grew up on our family farm. We're a very mixed business, but I really fell in love with cows. Started off feeding calves, graduated onto milking cows, even did, much to some people's shock, some showing as a kid. But I really wanted to know what the rest of the world was like. So I went off and did completely non-agricultural educational, got my degree at Durham. And then my first job out of uni was actually working for Imperial Tobacco. So on a Monday morning, I go to the local cash and carry in Aberdeen, pick up $5,000 worth of fags on an IOU, drive around all the corner shops in Aberdeen, and hopefully on a Friday, I'd go back with $5,000 in cash. Luckily, I didn't do that job for that long. And by the time I left Imperial, we were running global supply chain and sales restructuring projects. When I left Imperial, I then went to work for Genus, and at that time I would have visited a couple of you around here. And there I got to design and develop the genetic services strategy for Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Russia. Across both of those businesses, I learned loads of stuff. I think by the time I finished, I'd worked in over 25 countries. Learned loads about people, loads about business, and loads about cows. So back in 2017, something like that, I ended up going home and now look after nearly 700 cows across 2 sites. So our business is Huddlestone Farms Limited. We're just over 2,300 acres, and we're a family business. I'll talk about people in a second, but we're 2 dairies, 300 sheep, about 1,000 acres of arable, and then some commercial and residential lets. We are a very split site, so predominantly we're based down in Sussex on the south coast, but we also farm in southeast Scotland, so Berwick-upon-Tweed. So it is a family business, so mum and dad are still involved, and then myself and my 2 younger brothers are the management group for the farm. My dad does what he would call general management, and looks after our milk calves. My mum does all of our finance, our dairy nutrition, and looks after our residential lets. My middle brother's actually a vet. He runs a vet practice out the farm, looks after our sheep, and then he's also starting to try and make cheese. My youngest brother is a facts and basis qualified agronomist, and he does all of our cropping and all of our estate management. So I'm actually probably the least qualified out of all of us, but together we sort of make it work. People are a massive part of our business. So we've got 12 people on top of us across all the enterprises that make our business work on a day-to-day basis. And when I came home, we had a real sort of, I guess, shift in how we approach people management. And we really went from how do we get the most out of the people to how do we actually get them to give us the most. So instead of doing really long days, 12, 13, 14-hour days, where people can barely think and see what's in front of their face. It's about how do we give them the time and the opportunity, a bit more training, a bit more development, to make sure that every time they have to make a decision, they make the right decision, rather than the decision that's the easiest or the decision that's right in front of the face. And that's made a massive difference to our total business. And that's specifically true of the dairy. So we had, when I came back, we were milking 400 and something cows on an internal 32-point rotary. We did loads of little changes. So we changed cubicle widths, we changed feed space, we changed anything that was sort of easy, and it still didn't feel like we could get the most out of cows. We reduced the guys' hours, they were making better decisions, but it felt like there was just untapped potential left in the herd. The parlour was 22 years old at that point in time. It was due a pretty big bill, as anyone with rotary will tell you. When the bills are there, they're big. So we made the decision in 2022 to move to robots. And it's been a massive difference. So today we're over 12,000 litres sold at 4.6 and 3.5. So that's just under 3.1 kilos of fat and protein per cow per day, or sort of just over 1,100 kilos of fat and protein sold per cow per day. That change is a massive shift, just culturally. Going from milking 3 times a day to robots is phenomenal. You know, that thing where you get to your lunchtime milking and it's 1 o'clock and it was meant to start and it's now 1:15 and you still don't have any cows on the deck and everything's going a bit wrong. You know, we just don't have that anymore. The guys are quieter, calmer. The benefits of not having the bottom end of your workforce is really underrated. So we went from 6 guys doing 10-hour days to 3.5 guys doing 8-hour days, and milk's up about 10%. So I would say the robot decisions really paid off. And because we loved an easy life, just about as we'd finished that robot project, we had an opportunity to take on a contract farming agreement 10 minutes down the road. So we put our last robot in the January of 23 at Huddlestone, and in May of 24, this opportunity came to light. It came with the opportunity of an M&S contract, so that was a massive win for us, but they wanted continuous supply, or as near as they could get to it. So the timing wasn't great. We started talking about it in May. They sold all their cows in June. I think we bought our first load of cows to go into that unit on the 1st of August. We finally finished the paperwork on the 8th. My first son was born on the 13th, and we started shipping milk on the 21st. So, it's been a real learning curve, and 2 dairies definitely harder than 1 dairy. But short of a little bit of an extension on the shed, I think we're about there, and it's been a really good opportunity for us. So one of the big things that this enables us to do is that second dairy is a flying herd. So all of the genetics and all of the replacements for both dairies come out of our main herd. And that enables us to get a bit more out of the cows. So at home, we're the number 2 PLI herd in the country, in the UK. We're sitting just behind Andrew McCollum at Ballycairn, over here. And we have been comfortably behind him for a while. But the other herd at Thacombe is the number 5 PLI herd in the country. So genetics is a big part for us, and we're really PLI focused. I would say within that, we've got the opportunity to work out where we want to go and how we want to move. And we're really focused on combined weight of fat and protein and feed efficiency. So we don't breed an awful lot of young stock. We don't have huge amounts of space, and moving the young stock you don't want when you're in a really non-populated area of dairies and cows is quite hard. So to enable us to stay really competitive with genetic progress and to keep putting bulls into studs, we put in quite a lot of embryos. So we're putting in about 150 eggs a year, give or take. and we've got that cost down to somewhere between £60 or £100 an egg implanted. And that just, without having huge numbers of young stock, it really enables us to stay competitive. So lots of you who I've met before will not be surprised that I'm going to talk a little bit about conformation and type. So we haven't bred for type or conformation for the better part of 15 years now, probably since that black cow right at the start was born. And when you do that, that's the linear that you get. So I know loads of people, plenty of people sat around this room probably, who would never use a bull with a linear like that. Someone told me that was a Christmas tree linear, right? But for me, that's a really balanced linear, right? It's a linear I'd use every day of the week. And when you look at the cows that breeds, that's the cow that breeds, right? So Connor was talking about genomic testing, and your high milk cows give more milk, and your high component cows give more components. But when you have a linear like that, that's the cow that breeds. She's 94 points. She's got 4 unbelievable production records, and she's put 2 bulls into stud, one of which has sold over 40,000 units of semen. That's a phenomenal cow. And I could just have this slide up to be a bit controversial and to rile up the show boys a bit and like to, be a bit of an arse. But the real reason to have it up is because genetics moves really fast, right? And genetics is all relative. So it's not that we're going to have, we use that milk and that's the milk we're going to get, but we're going to get more milk. Or when we look at a cow that's +1 on stature, she's going to be higher on stature. They're going to be taller. They're going to be wider. They're going to be shorter. Every trait is relative. And especially when you're talking about conformation, because all of those traits down the bottom there are all relative to your stature trait. And every one of those traits is relative to a base cow. And that base cow moves a lot. Look at the gains that we saw when Connor was talking about fats, proteins, milk, right? I don't suppose there's huge numbers of management changes outside of that. A lot of that change will be genetic, and that's moved so fast. And yet, a lot of us are still breeding for type and conformation the same way we were 10, 15, 20 years ago, and the base cow is a completely different cow. And so we need to change how we're looking at those cows. So to emphasize that a bit, this is her great-great-granddaughter. Get that right? And so that mascole back in that pedigree is that first cow that we saw right at the start. This is the most exciting heifer I'm going to breed this year. Right? That's a super extreme linear. She's -3 stature, amazingly feed efficient. She's not going to eat anything. She's still going to produce a lot of milk. And is she going to be a 95-point cow? Maybe not. But is she going to be an excellent cow? Yeah, probably. That's a super balanced linear. It's all to the left, but it's all in proportion. And that's probably the most exciting thing for me, that cow. So she's going to get flushed in the autumn, in the summer. She's June born, and hopefully we'll make some bulls for stud. So into the nuts and bolts of it. Right, so we make genetic progress. We invest a lot in genetics. But the flip side of that is we need to see that value back. Right, and when you get into the real theory of it, it's super simple, right? It looks a bit complicated on that slide, but realistically, there's only 4 things you can do to change your genetic progress. That's it, right? So we can change how we rank and how accurately we rank the animals that are contributing to our genetic progress. We can change how intensively we select against those animals. We can reduce the number of animals we select from, and we can increase the generation interval. That's it. Once you've played with those 4 levers, you can't do anything else. Okay? So then we take those, whatever the outcome of those 4 levers are, and we put them into this environment that we have on our farm. Those 2 things combine, and the output is the performance that we see from those cows. So the one thing I would say is if anyone tries to tell you that matings will change your genetic progress, they're speaking out their arse, right? They won't make a blind bit of difference to how well and how much genetic progress you make. It will make matings will give you more consistency, But once you've picked the bulls and you've picked the cows, the genetic progress is going to be the same, right? So where do we start with this? Well, that bit on the right, P equals GE, right? So the genetics you put in mixes with the environment, gives you that phenotype or the performance of those cows. Right, the first thing is if we're going to get an accurate evaluation, we're going to rank those cows accurately, right? We need to make sure the base we're using is right. Connor talked about an American base or a UK base or whatever, right? But our cows exist in a UK environment, on UK herds, managed by UK people, with UK regulations, with diets that don't have any alfalfa in it, with loads of grass, and with UK feed prices. We need to use a UK base because guess what? It's a UK environment, and those genetics will react with the environment that we use on a day-to-day basis. If we want the most from our genetics, right, and we want the most genetic progress possible, we need to make sure that we're using genetics based on the environment they're actually going to perform in. Because, like it or not, we are not 200 cow, Mexican milked, intensive all 365 housed, alfalfa and grain maize fed herds from Wisconsin. That's just not the environment we live in. We live in a wet maritime climate, fed predominantly on grass. So the first thing is that we really need to make sure that we're using the right base. Then we get into all these different things that we can really look and choose and pick and play to change. But the biggest thing for me, and the thing that we don't do enough as an industry, is we don't have one consistent breeding goal. We don't put our plan in place. As we heard from the introduction, you've got to have a system, and the guys that fail are the guys without a system. But when you're breeding cows, you've got to have a plan, and you've got to stick to it. Right? If the plan is we're going to have longer-lived cows, right, make sure we're breeding for lifespan. If we want to have cows that are producing an awful lot of milk, make sure we use milk. But we're well past the stage where we're starting to rule cows out because the rump angle's wrong, so they're not going to get in calf. We've got fertility index, right? If we want cows to get in calf, pick on fertility. And then look at the data and the quality of the data that's going in. One of the reasons that Connor believes so much in genetics, and one of the reasons that we believe so much in genetics at home, is because we know that the cows that do the best are the best. We know that the cows on the paper, when I look at that, when I pick the computer up and I look at the genomic testing that's on the screen, the cows that are at the top of the genetic list there are the cows that are the best in the barn. Right? But that's because the data's good, and we know that the data's right. And so if we don't get the data bit right, then validating those results is really hard, and getting the confidence to go and invest that money is also really difficult. So I think there's a bit then around making sure that we get the right selection pressure, right? So it's really hard when you're looking at all these bulls in the catalogue. There's over 1,000 active bulls that you can buy today in the UK. How do you make sure that you're picking the right ones? Well, because it's not always the most expensive ones that are the right ones. But so something like a custom index will work really well for loads of people, but it's a little bit complicated, right? Sometimes it's as easy as look at the group of bulls you're going to use and make sure that you know what good looks like for the traits that we're going to use, right? So today, to be in the top 10% of bulls available for milk, you've got to be above 990 kilos of milk. But if you're going to be on the top 10% for lifespan, you've got to be above 125 days of lifespan, right? Finding a set of bulls that are going to do both those things, really, really hard. So work out which one of those things you want to do, and then make sure the bulls that you're using are going to actually do that. It's too easy to stick in a poorer bull, or a bull that drags the average down, or a bull that makes the overall cost of the group that bit cheaper. Well, actually, the best value money you spend is on male genetics, right? Spending an extra 2, 3, 4 quid on semen is the cheapest investment you're ever going to make. That's where the big return on investment is. Every time that we use a straw and we make a pregnancy, that's return on investment. If we take a genomic test, right, we've got to spend time doing the genomic test, then we've actually got to make a management change based on what that result is before we see any return on investment. So it's much harder to get return on investment from that genomic testing than it ever is from semen selection. That doesn't mean we shouldn't genomic test, In the grand scheme of things, genomic testing is not huge amounts of money, but we've got to make sure we utilize the results. And when you're not picking out the very best male genetics, you're not picking out your very best female genetics, then the genomic test is a bit of a waste of time, to be honest. We've got to do the basics really, really well. And the basics are have a goal and work out how you're going to execute. Finally, there's a bit of making sure that we're breeding replacements from the right animals. It's great picking all your male selection, but if we're not going to pick the right females to make them too, then that's a bit of a waste of time. And getting those heifers in early, reducing your generation interval, making sure we're breeding young stock to sexed, making sure we're using the best genetics we can from both a male and a female perspective will make a big difference. Beef's massive. I think one of the things that we see at home a lot, especially with beef calf prices the way they are, that actually if we can't, there's a huge amount of cash tied up in surplus young stock. And if you haven't got an easy outlet for them, then they generate huge amounts of cash by making sure we can really stay on top of replacement rates. And having those calves off farm at 14 days, I tell you, having a flying herd is so eye-opening about how easy life is if you don't have young stock. And every surplus calf and every surplus heifer that you have to take all the way through makes a big difference to your cash flow on a day-to-day basis. So, we get into all of these things and we get to genomic testing, and genomic testing in reality is not huge amounts of money, but as Connor will say, it can make a massive difference to how you end up picking and utilizing your genetics. But then when we start getting to, MOIT, IVF, breeding loads of heifers and then only picking the best, actually there's huge amounts of cost there. And sometimes we can take all that cost and reinvest it in an environment. And if we can make the environment better, make it more cow-friendly, make it more cow welfare-friendly, make it more consistent, then we'll see a bigger return on our genetic investment, right? Because you've got these two things. It's pointless spending loads of money on genetics and then trying to rear way too many young stock in a hovel, right? You're much better off to have fewer young stock reared in a brilliant environment where they can really express their genetics than to have the very best genetics but not give them the opportunity to express themselves. So it is that balance, right? It's that P equals GE. It's environment and genetics together will give you performance. It's not one or the other. And it's about making sure that we get the right genetics for the right time, for the right cow, for the right farm. So in summary, I guess it's do the basics really, really well. That's what we try and do at home, right? So it's nothing that we do, whatever aspect of our business it is, it's do the basics really well, try and not get tied down in doing the detail, work to 90% and do 90% really, really well. That last 10% will look after itself. Make sure the environment's good. We will regularly do that thing that Connor put up of, okay, are we seeing the returns from the cows? When we look at the environment, do we see the genetics expressing themselves? And pick the very best bulls you can. An extra £1 on semen is the cheapest investment you're going to make. And then make sure that we're replacement planning. How many heifers do you want? Are you going to hit them? The only thing worse than having too many heifers is having not enough. But planning for that, having a goal and having a plan makes a big difference. So yeah, I think that's probably it for how we do genetics. Like a lot of stuff, basics. Thank you very much.